Hey everybody, welcome to part two with our good friend Jay Sommers. Um, we had some huge technical difficulties. I was out back by the Geckos, but the internet would not allow us today. So, welcome back, Jay. And we were talking last time about the import export process and how easy it is to get a license, which it is, and but I think that there's a little bit more involved. That I had some questions, at least for me personally, and I'll share some of. I mean, I'm doing now. I'll be number two now. So my question for you would be: has there been any countries or any situations that have been more challenging than others? Not saying it's the country's fault, but just more because of the laws and because of their processes and stuff like that.
Um, I would say not particularly. You know, the main issue that we're running into in the United States now is that if you wanted to export from the U.S. to a country that requires a vet certificate, which there's a few, Europe is not one. You know, like you can freely ship to Germany or wherever. Uh, I don't recall because it's been so long if South Africa requires it, and I can't remember. I think it's Hong Kong requires it, but not South or Hong Kong, but not South Korea. Japan does not. So it just depends. So if you're export, I think Singapore um, requires it. I'm trying to think of countries that I've had to get vet certs for. And so in order to get a vet certificate, it's a USDA thing. And because of the way that they've have their rules now. You have like a set day that you want to do your shipping, and you have to get vet inspected, and the vet inspection the vet has to email the certificate or fax or email, but it's usually email, I think, um, to the USDA office, and it has to be an APHIS vet, and so and then they have to approve it, the USDA does, and then the problem is that it's a short. Then it expires. I forget how many days that it's valid before it expires, but so you have to be able to get that uh, vet cert done, cleared. They have to UPS it. They have to UPS or FedEx. I can't remember. So you send it to the USDA office, and then they send a physical copy to uh, your broker or yourself if you're doing your own broker. By the way, if you are the kind of person that wants to do your own uh, import export clearing and not use a broker, I think you're crazy. We're just gonna leave it at that. Uh, so you know, then they have to have it in hand for U.S. Fish and Wildlife for the inspection going out. Now we don't require a vet certificate on imports, so it's a non-issue for us. You know, but even I had a situation a couple years ago where I did an export for somebody out of state that they ran into an issue with being able to export these animals. They applied for CITES. The animals, were waiting for the CITES paperwork to clear, and in that time, they were tegus. They were really expensive tegus, and I think they were going to Hong Kong, if I recall. And there was a vet certificate issue with that. And so in the time from applying for CITES and the export and the CITES clearing, tegus got banned in Florida. So they had to take the tegus out of state and have them sit. But then when the CITES cleared, they couldn't bring them back into the state for the vet to inspect them. And so I did the export for him. And even then, I think something happened when they landed in Hong Kong and the vet certificate had expired or something. There was some hiccup and they wouldn't clear the shipment, and they had to get uh, an actual vet on that side to come and do an inspection, and then they were able to clear it. It was kind of a mess.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
and I was helping someone who's done a lot of great things to help me in the past, and he's a well-known guy. I won't say his name, but and it was a really expensive box of tegus,
yeah.
and it wasn't that many tegus. but some of the tegus were like $10,000, animals,
Sure.
yeah, and up, and so and there was like I think 50 total. So it was close to a $500,000 box of animals. So uh, and he knows what he's doing. So
Yeah.
this individual. So,
So
but there's always something, man. There's always something. You got to be able to be prepared for it. You have to be able to kind of roll with the punches, and that's where the experience comes into play. And I know I have people who literally import and export as a service and charge people money, a
yeah.
lot of money, to do the imports and exports for them. And if they have a problem, they're calling me and asking me for solutions. And I'll never put them on blast, but I think it's just funny that like you guys are, and they're well-known people, but like they never think, they always ask me for help in private, but you know, they never, and I don't care, but it's just funny to me that it's funny to me that people want to always take credit for things and never give credit for the people that really help them out. When I learned how to do import export, a lot of people like helped me out, you know. And then of course there's things you have to learn because I don't import and export pythons. I don't import and export like common things. So I've had to learn a lot of ins and outs that normal import export doesn't isn't really an issue, you know.
Right. Right.
So in some ways, I've gained more experience than someone who's done a lot more import and export in their life because they're importing and exporting, every week or something like that. But I've had to learn things that they would never need to learn.
Yeah.
So,
So if the United States doesn't require a health certificate for an animal coming in, is there a requirement for other countries to require health certificates for them leaving the country?
um, I don't know because like if it's not required on our end, you know, I don't know how that works. It depends on the country, I guess. There might be, there might be because like a lot of the countries that I've exported to, I've never imported from. So I wouldn't know the answer to that,
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
you know. But
Um,
in also in a lot of but also I will say this, in a lot of countries, uh like for example, Hong Kong requires a vet certificate for animals to come in. But I used to see the most horrific shit come in out of Hong Kong. Back when we were still able to import, export, or we're still allowed to export, but back when we were still able to import newts and salamanders, I would see shipments of like crocodile newts come in from Hong Kong, and the animals were like in horrible shape. And I always thought it was funny in a not funny way that we have to get a vet certificate to ship animals to them, but yet they're able to just send like half dead animals with giant sores and, lesions on their body and things like that. And, like emaciated and like, 2 days left to live type of shit. And I always thought that was kind of funny. But I also think it's funny that we have an injurious wildlife list that we cannot import, um, you know, I don't know how many species of Newton salamander now because it originally was 201 species and they've added things to it, like the whole genus Ambystoma. So it's probably over 300 or right around three to a little over 300 species of Newton salamander that we cannot import into the United States. But yet we can freely export them, no problem. No problem. The US doesn't care if we send sick animals out, but we're not going to let it in. And I think that's kind of an interesting hypocrisy.
I mean, that's very interesting because the I guess I won't say stereotype, but the kind of what people think of when you're working with the USFW is that they're staunch of staunch. I mean, they're the most difficult to work with and most hardest, and really they're really not. I mean, you still have to build relationships and you still have to be respectful and do the right thing. You always got to do the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
and they're generally helpful people. But it's interesting that we have so many requirements where, okay, we're not allowing to have Maltese gray eye come in for whatever reason, but you know, we don't care that you're sending half dead animals in here because we don't require a
Brother,
house certificate.
they wouldn't care if I cleared a shipment of fully legitimate legal Maltese gray eye and the whole shipment came in dead. They wouldn't care at all if they were just dead. And so, and that's another thing. So like a lot of countries, when they do like an export uh, inspection, whatever their respective wildlife agency is that's doing the inspections, they have policies in place, laws in place, like in the European Union. You know, if an agent on the European side was inspecting a box of animals and they saw like sick or, you know, wounded animals or diseased animals or something like that, that would not be okay. Whereas on our side, they don't care. You know, so like when you say they don't need a vet certificate or whatever, there is some level of visual inspection where they're granted the authority to give consequences or stop the ability for that person to import or export. Just that's in the agent's hands. Whereas here we don't, they frankly don't care. You know, if they
So
did care, we would have a lot more rules about uh, how a lot of the animals that get sold at shows uh, and by wholesalers that import wild caught stock for commercial purposes, you would never allow half of the shit that we see. You know, I mean, the amount of frogs, amount of other types of lizards and snakes that come in bad condition would never be allowed if we had rules in place. And that's going to wind up being to our detriment
yeah,
because at some point, somebody's going to raise hell enough to where they're going to fix that little like loophole or whatever you want to call it.
right.
And when they do, the hammer's going to drop.
Yeah,
And frankly, I mean, I have mixed feelings about it. You know, like I don't mind small batches of animals being imported for the pet trade as long as it's like a sustainable species. But at some point, I think that pet stores should evolve, and that's for the hobby, right?
yeah,
Most pet stores aren't really equipped to deal with the maintenance of like Brooksia and some of these other things, like satanic retail. Sure, some pet stores are, but for the most part, why are we supplying the retail pet trade with wild caught animals like leaf chameleons and some of this other stuff? Like pet stores should really just make their own shift in evolution to dealing with mostly captive bred.
yeah.
You know, like we shouldn't be importing tomato frogs, White's tree frogs, fire skinks. Like, I'm sorry, like we don't. Why are we importing all this stuff when you know we shouldn't be importing like Indonesian blue tongue skinks? You know, like there's so many northern blue tongues being produced now that whole bubble burst, and now there's a ton being produced, and their prices dropped, and they should do the same thing with uh, the Indonesian blue tongues. They should do the same thing with fire skinks. They should do the same thing with White's tree frogs. There is just absolutely zero excuse for importing White's tree frogs. You know, there's already more White's tree frogs being produced by, I couldn't even say the amount I mean, just when I took over running Sandfire Dragon Ranch, we were contracted with Petco to sell 500 White's tree frogs a week to them. That's 25,000 just to Petco. So like, there's no need to import White's tree frogs.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, and honestly, people aren't going to change. Pet stores aren't going to change. And so, you know, wholesalers can still survive if they buy captive bred animals domestically. You know, like they can still survive. Right? You can still wholesale them animals, and then they can still send them off to pet stores and turn a profit. There just needs to be a cultural shift. you know,
I agree.
and and it's going to be our own demise. And look, there's a lot of leaf-tailed geckos being produced these days, a
Yeah.
lot. And but the pet stores aren't going to get their cut because they're not going to buy those expensive ass leaf tails and turn around and sell them. And that's not a wholesale animal. And there's some things you just have to move on from.
Yeah.
Like why do you why would a pet store buy a wild caught, stressed out Europlatus lineatus to flip before it dies? Like are we still in this place? But there's all these different tentacles to this keeping animals in cages experience, and then there's, like I said, there's the morality aspect, the legality aspect, the ethics aspect. Like whose ethics, who gets to set that ethical standard, and so, like I said, I mean, I don't have an issue with people going on vacation and bringing back a couple of lizards here and there. I just don't see the moral. When I see some of the stuff that gets legally imported, that gets stamped and gets the okay from the government, and that's what makes it right, or that's right because the government said it's right. Like we shouldn't be importing things like Draco the little flying agomid. Why are we importing those? They're all going to die. They're all going to die. And so, like, why would we import Senegal chameleons? I don't really see them anymore, but they do still come in every once in a while. They pop up, or at least they used to, which was ridiculous. We have so many other chameleon species that are infinitely better suited for the pet trade as captive bred that there's no reason to bring those in. I mean, veiled chameleons really are a horrible pet for most people. I mean, it's a monster of a chameleon.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen male veiled chameleons. People have no idea. They really have no clue how big veiled chameleons can really get. As big as the biggest, Mellors or Parsons, just built differently. I mean, I have seen absolute monsters. Veiled chameleon. I've seen veiled chameleons eat birds, like in mid-flight. Because we have veiled chameleons all over Southern California. They live everywhere here. And so, I mean, I've seen them. And so, I have a problem with someone going and catching marine iguanas. I would have a problem with someone smuggling Naltinas. I have a problem with certain things, but outside of that, we're arguing legality and morality. And, some of the most legal stuff I find to be the most immoral.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to the mindset and the culture of the United States retail pet trade.
Yeah. So what has been your longest import from time of saying, yes, I want
well,
this,
as far as me having to wait for something I want, or like the biggest problem I've had with import or export?
From the time that you've actually said, okay, this is what I want, you have an agreement with somebody, they're going to send you 5, 6, 10, whatever.
It's pretty quick. I mean, a couple weeks. I mean, there's things where I said, hey, next year when you produce some of those, I want some, like that kind of thing. But that's, that's not the animals are available and I'm having to wait for them to go through all the process. I mean, typically in the past, because everything wasn't digital like it is now. So now it's way different than what it used to be. But I mean, back in the day, you'd have to wait sometimes. I mean, to do your 3177 is pretty quick. I don't even fill out 3177s. I haven't filled out a 3177 in 20 years. And for those who don't know what that is, it's also now called an EDEC because it's an electronic declaration. But we used to call it a 3177, and you had to manually fill it out, and you'd have to go through this process. But that's all easy stuff. You only have to give Fish and Wildlife 48 hours notice on something that they need to inspect, whether it's coming in or going out. And so, but like, I think the only real, as far as like me having to wait for stuff, I've been pretty patient about things, but that's more about the availability of the animal than it's been any problem with the import or export process. And as far as like the only real big issue I've ever had that was like a serious problem was I had shipped a pretty big box of animals to uh, South Korea. This has been quite a few years ago, and there was an issue. The plane had to stop in China, and there was some issue with China about landing and how long it was going to be there or something. Well, and then there was like a snowstorm, and the animals literally got shipped back to the United States, and then had to go back to uh, uh, South Korea, and that took like well over a week for that whole process. And
That's
some of the
crazy.
animals died. Some of the animals died. They were frozen.
Well, I'm sure.
But
Sure.
it wasn't that bad, but it was pretty bad. It sucked. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. All right. Well, switching gears back to the Nautinus. Um, you asked me earlier. I pulled out all the books that I had
Mm.
from Nautinus, so um, I can share them real quick. But I printed this out. This was a
Oh, Rob Rowlands.
yeah,
I know. Yeah, he's an old time native keeper in New Zealand.
yeah, yeah. So I,
Yeah.
I I printed that out because that was back in the. I mean, this
I,
is
I
probably
I don't even know if
10 years.
he's around. Is he still alive?
I don't even know.
Oh, I mean, I used to talk to him every once in a while. He would be on some Gecko forums, like when forums were still a thing back in the day. But yeah, he was one of those guys native.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
then I
was
got
just thinking because I thought, which one is that?
this is just a field guide to
Who's the author? Is that the Brian
Tony
one?
Jewell. Tony Jewell.
Oh, Tony Jewell. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And then we got another field guide from
I know that one.
this is Dylan Van Winkle,
Okay.
and then I got the New Zealand
Yeah,
Lizards,
lizards.
David
Okay.
Chappelle, and then lastly I got the book that
Mm-hmm.
Herman and
Yeah.
Nicholas wrote
Yeah.
together.
One of those Chimera books.
Yep.
Yeah. The reason why I asked is I was just like, oh, let me look at my books. I have them right here. Uh, I have a lot of books, not just stuff on New Zealand shit.
Oh yeah, me too.
But I mean, I have everything from the developmental biology of the axolotl to the herpetofauna or the herpetology of Mexico to, I mean, I have a lot of books, dude. I have a lot of books and a lot of irreplaceable expensive books.
Oh yeah.
You have this one
No,
by Rob. You should get this
no.
one. I looked it up earlier. And it's available. Luckily, you can find copies of it
Yeah, I'm in. I'll look that up.
by Joan Robb. And then I'm not going to be able to find all my books right now while I'm on the spot here, but
No, it's okay.
here's a funny little one. I don't even know where I got this from. I have a lot of things that just pop up in my collection somehow by Ginny Jones.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
And then there's where's it at? Frogs and Reptiles in New Zealand by Brian Gill.
Okay.
This is a
Yeah.
good one. It has some good stuff in it. And then I just have other stuff. It was funny because I had watched part of your podcast with Chris Anderson,
Oh yeah.
and I was just like I was laughing about the chameleon from the Seychelles. And it's like, I know that
Oh
chameleon. I have a book on the Seychelles, and
yeah.
actually I'm looking at it right there by Hinkle and Schmidt, by Willie Hinkle. And I thought, man, you guys just need to talk to day gecko breeders, man. They'll be able to breed the shit out of those chameleons.
Yeah.
Because I used to breed a lot of of geckos like Aeoloronyx, the Seychelles skin sloughing gecko or the bronze gecko, and then there's quite a few Phelsuma day geckos from the Seychelles, and I'm like, they breed the same way. They just stick their eggs down there in the little base of the plant and whatever.
The chameleons that the Tergis or whatever, they're pretty amazing
Yeah,
species.
yeah, they're
Uh,
cool.
they are very cool.
Yeah, I see them
So
popping up. I see them pop up in people's collections in Europe, and I'm like, those are pretty sweet. But I'm like Chris. It was funny because he was like, "Oh, I love Honelli," and I'm like, "I love Honelli. That's like definitely way up there in my favorite chameleons."
yeah, that's a pretty small chameleon like the Bradypodian
Yeah,
that can be very colorful and very bold and
yeah.
very. I mean, they're. I
They're
know
they're a
Frank.
big chameleon in a little chameleon's body.
Yeah, I know Frank Payne recently got I think a couple pairs or maybe a few pairs. So it'd be interesting to see what he does with those. But I've always loved the Bradypodian and was able
Hmm.
to get a few pairs of the Bradypodians and that are true captive bred chameleons. So it's been fun. I mean, they're really interesting and really fun to keep. I wouldn't say they're as bold as the Honelle, but they're pretty close. I
Right.
mean, you know, but you know, back to the Noltinus, I had some questions. So, obviously we talked last time about, the air movement and all screen and 100% on that. What sizes are you using for your enclosures? And are you keeping yours in pairs their whole life, or are you separating, or
Sometimes, but gray eye and elegans are such different geckos that they're not even comparable.
explain
Gray
that?
eye and elegans. Well, I mean, elegans is just they're a little more delicate. They require a little bit more attention. They have some, I guess, eccentricities, I would say. They're just different. They're just different. I wouldn't even compare their. I mean, the general parameters are similar, but they're just not as tough of a gecko. And I think that it's kind of like they get some pairs do really well together, some trios do really well together. Gray eye, I've never had a problem with. Elegons, sometimes they can not really be dominated, but they're just more submissive with whatever their cage mates. And I don't know if that is caused by, I don't want to say aggression. I've never really seen a lot of aggression with Naltinus. It's more like subtle things, like with a lot of, well, like dart frogs, like we talked about dart frogs. You won't see a lot of outright fighting with females and things like that if you keep them together, certain species. But what will happen is this one will just kind of like start sitting in the corner or be over here and then just stop eating or whatever. And I think elegans can be susceptible to some of these types of things, to being affected more by stress than like a gray eye is. Gray eye just seems to be a little bit more uh, like less susceptible to being stressed out and having less. They're just less delicate animals. So like if I was doing like breeding a lot of elegans, uh, I would probably I would at least keep the males separate during cooling, and then just watch them for whatever issues. But like I said, they're not really that aggressive. It's more like, oh, we have an animal here that I can kind of see is kind of falling off a little bit, and if you don't catch it in time, it's done. You know, and it's a very subtle thing. It can be very, very subtle, and you learn to recognize things in your animals, and it's not just Nautinus. It's like all animals. I can tell. These things become very much creatures of habit usually, and especially outside of like breeding stimulation. And so they usually like to sit in the same place in the cage all the time, especially at certain times of day. And if you walk by and they're not in the spot they're supposed to be in, or they're on the floor, or they're over here and they're kind of sitting a weird way, then you're like, okay, what's going on here? Something's up, you know? And so subtle things like that you got to catch. Uh, you know, but as far as gray eye, I've never had problems keeping them together. Never. There's been
And then,
times with elegons in the past where I've separated them because one will start kind of like falling off a little bit,
yeah. And then,
you
like
know.
my enclosures are 18 by 18 by 30, I think, is what I'm
Yeah, mine
keeping.
too. Mine too.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's like a very common medium chameleon cage type
yeah,
situation.
yeah. And what I've noticed, and I don't know about you, but what I've noticed is it seems to be plenty for them. You know, because I
Oh
did
yeah, I
use,
mean it's a big cage for those. Yeah.
yeah, because I custom built my enclosures the year before. Excuse me, and I did a 18 by 18 by 36, but I felt that it was almost too big for them.
Yeah, I think
And
that's too big.
you know, I didn't I saw more I mean, they're already shy animals, but I saw more shyness, more hiding. I didn't see much utilizing the enclosure like I do with the smaller.
Right, because they're too exposed. They're too exposed,
Yeah,
you know. And so, you know, I always tell people that there's certain species of animal that when you keep them, it's best not to give them too many hides. It's best not to give them too much space. And because a lot of animals, there's like this weird switch where they'll, if you give them too much space or you give them too many places to hide, what happens is they turn timid and then all they do is hide all the time. And they'll hide so much they won't even come out to eat.
yeah,
And then they just kind of waste away. And there's a lot of species like that. So you have to strike that balance, you know.
yeah,
Plus, a lot of times when you give, let's say you have a group of animals together, sometimes it's best with certain species to have them under a little bit of stress. Not unhealthy, but like if you have super aggressive species, for example, even if they're not aggressive, but like they respond to like physical, like visual and physical cues in body language of other animals. Like not necessarily that they're attacking and fighting, but they're just being dominated, right? And by postures or body language or like eye contact, things of that nature. And so with a lot of those types of animals, keeping them in a situation to where they're not really allowed to establish a territory can be the make or break difference between like having an all out like violent catastrophe of one animal like even killing the other cage mate and then like existing fairly peacefully um and even breeding, you know. And I don't know because I've never kept Maltinas in cages that big, but I would imagine that, you know, when they're in a smaller cage, as long as it's not too small, they're not really allowed to develop a territory that they would have these defensive behaviors that they might have in the wild. And so the difference, and then the other issue we come to with a lot of animals uh, is that if they're in a big enough enclosure to where they're able to establish some type of territory that they want to defend, then when they go to turn aggressive, they're restricted within the confines of this cage and they can't escape, which is like doom. So like in nature, they would have the whole world to escape to get away. But in a cage, so it's like you have to strike a balance with certain species. And so I can't really comment on Nautinus. I know a lot of keepers in New Zealand keep Nautinus in really big cages,
yeah,
really big. But I don't know if they're keeping them in pairs or trios or single animals. There's a lot of people in New Zealand that just keep one animal.
yeah,
You know, the permit system there is kind of weird. You have to get your animals from another breeder that has a permit. And of course, we're dealing with an animal that gives birth to one or two babies every year or two. So it's not like there's this flooding, uh, of availability. And a lot of these animals, I mean, how much of their demand is there? How many people in New Zealand are like, oh, I want to keep native New Zealand lizards? There's not that many. And there's also there's a lot of variety for them to keep. There's different skinks. There's other types of geckos. Like a lot of them over there don't even keep Maltinus. They keep a lot of like Hoplodactylus, you know? And so, there's that too. And, but then again, like I said, I don't even compare the way we keep Maltinus and the way that a person in New Zealand keeps Maltinus. To me, is like not comparable, because they're feeding them different foods. Their animals are so inbred there that they have a lot of problems in New Zealand with their animals. I mean, there's even leucistic Maltinus over there because of the inbreeding. That like pure white Maltinus that have popped up. And so, comparing our husbandry with their husbandry is not really appropriate. I mean, we have availability of different food items. Our temperatures are quite different, and just the way we keep them, and the animals are so far removed from that native stock that so genetically, our genetics are more diverse.
Okay.
And that plays a big part of it too.
Yeah.
So
we talked a little bit about the plants that you use, and then the stuff that you hang out, the asparagus that you do on the sides. Are you
yeah.
providing basking branches and cork bark tubes and bamboo
No.
or nothing?
No. No. No, and that's another reason why you don't want to keep Maltinus in glass cages. Not only is it a ventilation issue, but the surface area that's usable to them increases when you keep them in a screen cage, because they have no problems climbing the screen, And so because of that, they have so much more usable space. And so, no, I just never used cork tubes. And I would think, I mean, maybe people do use bamboo, but I would think they'd have a hard time holding on to the bamboo, because of the way their feet are, their toes, their claws. And so, I mean, have you seen them adhere to bamboo pretty well?
Yeah.
Or is it slick?
So my friend out in California, actually, he does mostly chameleons, and he does outdoor keeping year round for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, Jonathan, I use these bamboos for certain things. He's like, I could send you some. I'm like, okay. I saw the New Zealand people use them, and I'm like, okay, cool. So I saw that the New Zealand people were zip tying the bamboos, so if they do separate, the gecko doesn't get their foot stuck in there or their tail in there. And
Oh, you mean like that little crack? That crack?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do that. And what I've noticed, I have bamboo in my enclosures, and they do utilize it. So I don't keep it vertical; I keep it horizontal. So what I do is I put them in the bushes. So the bushes are actually holding the bamboo, and they actually utilize them. They actually go in there, and what I found is that they like to be snuggled close together, per se, if you will, especially when it gets to the colder temperatures and it gets into the brumation months. They really utilize it. Now I don't have it filled with them. I have maybe like 2 or 3 in there at different levels in the enclosure, but they do seem to utilize them, and that's why I was asking you. But far as basking, I do have a basking horizontal branch in there, but I rarely ever use, unless they're inside, they will use it. But that's because the heat lamp is back on that. But generally, I see them kind of basking in the sense of like dabbling basking. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, where it's.
I know what you mean.
But they stick their head out.
I'll see pregnant females bask, but that's about it.
And how are they basking?
Well, I mean, I don't really give them the structure that you're describing, and so they'll just sit either in the top of a bush, or they'll, just be on the side of the cage,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
or
Yeah,
on that plastic asparagus fern stuff. They'll sometimes just sit on the outside of that.
mm, yeah, yeah, and I do see active basking on the sides of the screen, side of the enclosures
Hmm.
too. You know,
Yeah.
um, but for me, I've had them a couple years now. For me, I thought I would see more active basking because that was the whole thing about them. They have to be outside. They have to have the sun. They have to have this. And I'm,
Yeah.
I'm not debating that. But in my head, my perception was that I would see a lot more basking than I actually really do outside, anyways.
Yeah, I don't really see them. The only time like I said, the only things I've ever seen them actively basking are females with babies, you know.
How much exposure to sun are you giving them per day?
I mean, sometimes they're just inside a lot, and sometimes I'll take them out for a little while. I'm not that big of a believer in UV. We've had this discussion a little bit. Like, I don't use UV lighting on anything. So my purpose of keeping Naltinas outside has nothing to do with them getting UV from the sun. It's more of just being outside. Even animals that people have kept inside for years, whether it's their pet bearded dragon or their tegu or their boa constrictor, it seems the minute that you take an animal outside and they get fresh air, they turn into a different creature. It's really weird.
Huh.
Like I say, they turn wild. But it's more about just not having to have the lights on. It's more like getting them outside when the weather is appropriate. It's not, for me, it's not about the sun because I don't use UV lighting. And people are like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And I say, well, okay. I mean, prove me wrong. Prove me
Well,
wrong. You know, I even had some conversations years ago with Chris Anderson about that. And everybody's like, but it's like, are those feelings of anxiety that you have and that doubt in your mind, is that from propaganda or is that from actual real experience? I saw something on a line today somewhere on, it was like somebody posted something on Facebook, and I think it was about tribal anodes, the red-eyed croc skinks. And somebody was like, I don't know, I've been told not to feed mealworms. And then I watched 20 people respond about why you shouldn't feed mealworms and how they will eat their way from the inside of your animal. And I'm like, are people really still like preaching this mantra? Like, you guys really still believe that bullshit? Like, that's bullshit, you know? Like, there's no such thing as mealworms being bad for your animals. It's like patently absurd. And so, uh, I mean, then I must be crazy because I feed mealworms to some of the most rare and expensive and delicate animals that are kept in captivity, and I've never had a problem, you know.
do you
And I've
want to
never had a
expand?
problem with. I would say I've never had a problem with metabolic bone disease, and I don't use full spectrum lighting.
Do you want to
And
expand? Could I guess? I mean, you don't have to get into the controversy or anything like that, but do you want to expand a little bit on why you choose not to use UVB, and have you done
yeah, I think it's a
your
waste of money.
have you have you tried using UV in the past and not seen any benefits to it? Is there
I
any of
mean,
that?
I I don't use UV, and I haven't historically used UV. And I've never had these problems that people claim to have because of full spectrum lighting or a lack thereof, I should say. And, uh, you know, I can just go down the list of animals that I have kept and bred. And I'm not saying I had them for 6 months. I'm saying I've had these species for years and years and years and bred multiple generations, F3, F4, F5 in my collection of these species. And I've never had metabolic bone disease. And we can talk about uromastics, we can talk about xenogama, we can talk about the over probably 35 to 40 different species, subspecies of Phelsuma, the 100 plus, God, 200 species of diurnal geckos that I've kept and bred from diurnal desert dwelling stuff. I've bred at least 4 to 5 species in the genus Prosturus. Just all these chameleons, all these animals that people say, oh, you have to have UVB. And I'm like, nah, you don't. You just need to supplement. And, and people get all upset. And I'm like, well, you cannot. Then prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. I've bred probably 450 plus species of gecko. And I've bred 3 species of New Zealand geckos, Maltinus and Hoplodactylus both. Why don't Hoplodactylus need full spectrum lighting? They're a gecko from New Zealand.
Yeah.
Why don't they need UV? Explain that to me. Explain to me how Hoplodactylus that lives on the same island evolved to not need UV, but yet Maltinus supposedly does. And they said, well, if an animal can't properly absorb and synthesize or process calcium without D3, which you get from the sun, supposedly, then how do all the reptiles and amphibians in captivity that are kept in rack systems, and I'm not just talking about snakes, I'm talking about lizards too, how do they absorb their calcium? And I say, like when I took over the operations at Sandfire Dragon Ranch, and the first thing I did was get rid of bearded dragons. But like even Sandfire, bless, and I'm not bad mouthing Bob. Bless Bob, he's the greatest human being that ever walked the planet Earth. He was a very good friend of mine. I knew him for many decades. And I said, did it ever occur to you that your slogan, bearded dragons raised in the California sun, was a bit of like erroneous? And he was like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you're literally proving my point that these lizards don't need UV. The reason why you're proving my point, my position, that bearded dragons don't need UV, is that you keep your bearded dragons without UV. And he just kind of looked at me. And I said, they're not in the outdoor sun in California. They're in a greenhouse with a plastic cover, and you've painted the cover white to reflect the sun so it doesn't overheat in the summer. So not only is the UV not penetrating the plastic film that the greenhouse is covered with, but you also painted white paint over that plastic film. These bearded dragons never see the sun. They might have ambient lighting that's unrestricted because of the sun, but the sun, there's no UV rays hitting these things. And the only time I've ever seen metabolic bone disease or issues with like that type of development in an animal, or I've seen animals that get the shakes, like the hind leg shakes or things like that, right? The only time I've ever seen that is because of supplementation problems, not because of the sun or the lack of the sun. Plus, most people that claim to have the UV, like they're not using the UV lighting properly anyway. Like if you have a dart frog and you swear up and down that UV is the way to go, I have this beautiful terrarium, this beautiful dart frog terrarium, and UV is the way to go, man. Like you got to use it, you got to use it. I use UV. Look at my dart frog terrarium, this beautiful masterpiece with my beautiful dart frogs, and I've got UV lighting. And then I'm like, yeah, but you have a piece of glass between the light and the animals. Like you have a solid glass top, and that glass is filtering out all the UV.
Yes. All right. So finish your thought on that. Oh,
Are we good?
yep, we're good. That's you can finish your
Okay.
thought on that.
Oh, I saw it freezing, so I wasn't sure where it stopped, you know?
The you were talking about the only time that you saw metabolic bone disease was because of the supplementations, and then you were talking about
Yeah,
dart frogs putting UVB lamps on top of the enclosure, but the person was using glass, so that defeats the purpose
exactly.
completely.
Right.
So
And so, you know, and then I understand that these companies make UV lighting and they've propagandized everyone into believing you have to have UV lighting, right?
yep.
And I understand that they give you, you can buy a little meter now by the same company that makes the light bulb, and you put it underneath the light and it shows that it puts out UV. But no one has ever proven that you have to have UV. The whole thing is based off of like human studies back in the day that said that human beings, there's like a protein, I forget the exact everything, but it's like basically you can't absorb, you have to have D3 in order to basically absorb or synthesize calcium, to keep it simple, right? And and so then my response to that is, then why do we put D3 in the supplement? Because if you have a full spectrum bulb, and the purpose of the full spectrum bulb is to give you D3, your lizard or your frog or your whatever, D3, so that uh, they're able to absorb the calcium that you give them, and their body can utilize it, then why the fuck are you putting D3 in the supplement? And nobody ever questions it. Everybody just goes along with it. It's like a religion. And I just say, okay, well, you know, you can argue with me all you want. I mean, how many Naltinas have you produced in the last 30 years? How many Phelsuma, how many day geckos have you bred and produced in your lifetime? How many, you know, Uromastics? I mean, there's people out there that have Uromastics in me because they've been working with them their whole life, you know? Uh, but, you know, I've had like Thomas I for 20 years. I never use full spectrum lighting. And most people don't use full spectrum lighting. Most breeders don't really use full spectrum lighting. I know all the influencers that are on like YouTube and Instagram and TikTok. I know they all promote full spectrum lighting, and it absolutely has nothing to do that they're secretly being paid by the companies to promote the product. You know what I mean? Like every one of these influencers that you see, frankly, not everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, the majority of them are absolutely full of shit. They're selling you bullshit. They're not telling you up front that they're being paid by the company, that oh, look at me do this build. Oh, look at me dust this supplement on these crickets as I feed my lizards. They don't tell you that they're not only getting that product for free, they're also getting paid. They're getting paid by that company. And half of the stuff that they tell you is bullshit. Half of the builds that you see of people like assembling these terrariums, and that's not sustainable. What they're not telling you is that the day after they shoot the video, they've ripped that whole thing apart and thrown all the plants away, because there's no way in hell that that terrarium would be able to survive. The plants wouldn't work. Very few plants that you buy at Home Depot are going to work in a terrarium. You know, first of all, they're going to outgrow them. And so, like, it's just a bunch of BS. And of course, all these people are telling you. But then a lot of people, they're so scared because of what they've been told for all these years. Like, I can't, I mean, you have to use UV. Why? Well, because I heard it from a guy that 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 also heard it from a guy like 30 years ago. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I will say one thing. The color of a UV light historically is much more pleasing than just like a yellow light bulb. You know, that kind of bluish white light that they put out. And so back in the day, all of us gecko breeders that had huge collections, right? And I'm talking about people that bred geckos that absolutely 1000% required UV lighting. At least that's what you were told. None of us used full spectrum lighting. Most of us just went and bought 4-foot shop lights and daylight fluorescent 4-foot tubes, and that's what we used. But those lights weren't putting out UV. It's just the color. And I do think that that does matter a little bit. I think that the color of the light does matter. Uh, and so when I buy, first I went from that to the coil bulbs, the compact fluorescents, right? But I wasn't buying like expensive full spectrum bulbs. I was just buying like the 4-pack of daylight compact fluorescents at Home Depot for like, $7. And then now I just use LED like shop lights, but they're not even shop lights. They're just these little bitty thin 4-foot tubes. And I just get the daylight LED. And I only get it because of the color it puts out. I could give a shit if it's UV, But like I said, everybody that wants to come at me all the time, I just say, okay, well, how many species have you bred? How many times have you bred them and kept them for like years over multiple generations without UV? And how many times have you seen an animal with metabolic bone disease that had UV lighting? I've seen a lot of that too. But it's the same philosophy as the people that put like nighttime heat bulbs on their animals. I always laugh when I see that. I'm like, why are you giving your animal nighttime heat? Like they'll get like a North African desert gecko or like a leopard gecko, okay? Or, like different stenodactylus or things of that nature, right? And it's like, do you understand how like the daytime and the nighttime works? Like they don't need a hot light at night. It gets cold at night in the desert. I mean, in some places it's not, but your animals can take it cold. Let them cool down.
I remember that was all the rage back in the day. Like when I first, I mean, probably in the early to mid 90s. Oh,
Yeah.
this bulb is 24/7. You can keep it on 24/7. You have nighttime vision to watch your animal. And that was all the rage back then. And that obviously shortly lived
Yeah.
because
Red light
now
bulbs.
it needed to cool down,
Yeah.
you know.
It's real simple. Just check the weather. Almost
Right.
everywhere in the world, it's warmer during the day and colder at night.
Right. Right.
I mean, yeah, okay. I mean, in some desert situations, in peak summertime, it's 110 degrees at midnight still, but those are extremes.
Yeah.
Those are extremes, and even in those situations where the 2 months out of the year it's like that at night, a lot of the animals they're not out at midnight when it's that hot because it's too hot for them. Even the desert dwelling stuff, unless it's something that's really geared towards being out in the heat, like a Eurymastix or a lot of the desert agamids. But a lot of the other animals that come out at night, different snakes, lizards, geckos, things like that. If it's that hot, they're not coming out, or they'll come out for a brief period and then be done. So I just, then tell me how it is that I've had all this success and throughout the years and never had metabolic bone disease from not using UV.
Well, I can't argue that point with you, brother.
Yeah. I mean, and using Altinus as an example is maybe not 100% appropriate because they do go outside and, they do go outside in the screen cages and stuff like that. But, not enough to where I think it matters. Like I would absolutely, like I would have no issue keeping an Altinus indoors year round under just LED lights that I buy a 12-pack on Amazon for like $60.
Do you use a hotspot inside for a few hours a day?
No. No, no, no. And I let them get, 78 to 82, no problem. And if they're outside and it gets hotter than that, then that's fine too. As long as it doesn't get too hot. If it gets too hot, I bring them in, or if I think it's going to, you know. And too hot, I don't like to push it past 86.
Yeah, that's
You know,
kind of
and
where
I mean, I
that's
have
where I'm
I
coming
have
at
like a
too.
temp gun, I'm on top of it. But also
Yeah,
understand that when it's 86 degrees outside, uh, they can also go into their plant a little bit and get some shade, and it's a few degrees cooler. And if you have a live plant, which I do, and I think you do too, in every
yeah,
cage, they can go sit in the substrate of the plant. And plus, if you're misting your animals, you know, the whole world has been cooling their homes for many years off of a philosophy and a theory called evaporative cooling. And so you're going to have some cooling effect when there's evaporation, whether it's from the soil in your plant or you spraying them. So there's these little things that people don't think about, you know. And it's kind of like I breed a lot of cold water amphibians. I breed a lot, a lot. I mean, I have a whole section of uh, like a lot of aquariums. I don't even know how many, but 150, something like that, where it never gets above, like, even the hottest part of the year, it never gets above like 68, maybe
wow,
70, maybe. And usually
wow,
it's 65 or colder. In the winter, it gets a lot colder. And I tell people, when you get a newt, the number one rule, unless you're a savage that keeps you live in an area that you don't have air conditioning, and it's like, Phoenix, Arizona or something, which you shouldn't be keeping them anyway. But for the most part, if you're a normal, you know, well adjusted person, you don't keep your house at like 85 degrees. And
yeah,
so just don't put a lid on your tank. Allow, because then you're trapping the heat in. Whereas if you have an escape for the evaporating, like for the evaporation, then it's going to cool a little bit just by evaporative cooling. And then, now Zoom Ed and all these companies are making these little fans. Some of the reef companies for reef tanks and stuff like that, they make these little fans that blow on the water. Well, they're just speeding it up. They're not cooling the water. They're causing the evaporation to speed up. It's not like a chiller. And so that just makes it cooler. And you can do the same thing. You just got to watch it and don't push it. And of course, I think gray eye are hardier of temperatures than elegans are. You know, I mean, I've seen people over the years in Europe, especially, that like are experienced keepers, and every once in a while they have a big problem, and it's because they screwed up and it got too hot that day in Germany or Austria or wherever, and it got too hot that day and they lost some animals, which is crushing. But it's also the majority of the time it's elegance. You know, I mean, sometimes people have issues with gray eye, but gray eye are just a little bit hardier, a little bit tougher.
yeah. So maybe talk a little bit. Obviously, the supplements in the way that you feed your animals, particularly the Altinus. We talked about it last time. You said you feed crickets. So are you obviously? I'm gonna assume that you're gut loading your crickets, and then you're supplementing.
Always.
And what are you using for maybe your gut load, and what do you use for your supplements? Um, Maybe go through that a little bit.
So I don't really provide crickets water. I will give it to like pinheads and stuff like that, just so they don't dehydrate and dry up. But for the most part, I'm just feeding, vegetables. And so, carrots, sweet potatoes, different leafy greens. Sometimes I'll do squash if it's laying around. Um, and so, it's random. I don't have like any methodology that I adhere to strictly. And when it comes to supplements, I remember It's funny because I remember we were talking the other day about how you used to have to give a presentation with slides. And I remember I had my first Gecko presentation, 30 years ago. And one of my slides was a picture of all the different supplements that I used. And I explained at that time, even back then, I explained that I don't use any one supplement religiously, and that I do everything um, with no rhyme or reason. There is a rhyme or reason, but it doesn't look like it. And I said, look, I have a large collection of diverse species, uh, and I have to be able to kind of deal with them as a whole. I don't have the time to, you know, specifically, you know, like fine tune a husbandry protocol for this thing. I mean, there's some animals I have to do that with, but those are exceptions to the rule. So what I would do, and I still do, I just do it with less supplements now because we frankly have less available than what we used to have. Is I would just one day I would use this supplement, one day I would use a different supplement, another day I'd mix two supplements, another day I might mix three, another day I might mix five of them together. And I just would just kind of randomly rotate with no real, plan. And my thinking, and I still do that. And my thinking is that all of these companies get their source the ingredients from different places. Like one company might use cuttlefish for calcium. One company might use ground up oyster shell for their calcium. And in my brain, I always thought, well, the human body, processes like vitamin C from pineapple or a green pepper differently than how it absorbs vitamin C from like an orange, and calcium from milk and calcium from broccoli. That was, so I thought, why not just kind of cover the spread and kind of cover all my bases the best that we can in keeping animals in captivity, because I can't go to the country of origin of every species I have and field collect insects with a net to feed them every day or two, And so you have to kind of like compromise there. And so that's why I do that. And I still do that. And then there's just some supplements that I won't use anymore. I want to be careful not to say things that I think are detrimental, but mineral used to be a really good supplement, but it was also really potent. And it was developed by a chameleon breeder who was big time into chameleons and who was kept a peer group of chameleon people. And chameleons' needs are a little bit different than like other lizards and geckos' needs, especially when you're talking about like their calcium needs and some of the other needs that they have with the ways that they like produce, like a panther chameleon. They can lay multiple clutches a year, 15 to 40 eggs in a clutch, and that's pretty taxing on an animal like that. And so, plus their anatomy is such that they just develop in a different way than a lot of other lizards. And so, what I would find that a lot of people had trouble with, and so did I sometimes, is that you could burn up animals because it made them want to, it was like almost like hypervitaminosis type deal, or, just they would produce more than what they would, or they'd use up. It was just too much of any given ingredient that they might put in there. But I liked mineral as a supplement as part of my program. But it wasn't the one I focused. Yeah, it wasn't the one I focused on the most or anything like that. And then when it got sold a few years ago, I stopped using it, and it's just because I don't know if I can trust that product is still going to have the adhere to its integrity that it in reputation that it had before. And I'll just leave it at that.
Understand.
And so yeah, I mean, but I use everything. I use RepCal, I use Herptivide, I use whatever Zoomeds brand is. I forget. I use Repashy stuff. I used to use this stuff by Mardell that I really liked, and it was very fine, like powdered sugar calcium, and it adhered to crickets really well. But I don't even know if it's made anymore. I don't use it anymore, but I don't know if it's even made. But like I said, I don't have these issues with calcium problems, you know. And
Yeah,
I mean that's even through the production. You know, animals are producing and laying eggs, and their calcium stores aren't being depleted. You know,
yeah.
so
Have you dipped into the Arcadia stuff at all?
nah. The lighting or
No, no, no.
supplements?
Supplements.
Nah, no.
Just leave it at that.
No, I don't have anything negative to say. I mean it's an indifference. I mean I'm familiar with the company. I've seen their lighting stuff. I've seen like whatever, you know, but I just don't know that I would benefit. I haven't had any issues with the way that I do things in 30 years, you know. So I don't really see much reason to change my any of my protocols,
I, yeah, I agree. I
you
probably
know.
wouldn't either.
Yeah.
I
And
probably would.
I've fixed a lot of other people's problems, you know, but I haven't had issues. Other people have had issues that I've had to come in and address. And, you know, sometimes you really have to peel back the layers and kind of figure out what the issue is. And sometimes it's like, well, you're not supplementing or you're not I supplement every feeding.
Yeah.
I supplement every feeding, almost every feeding. Sometimes I'm like, whatever, once here and there. But, you know, for the most part, I supplement every feeding. And I remember there was a big issue with some production years ago at a really big company. And I went in and I was like, well, let's see what's going on. And I said, well, this is a problem. Your employees aren't supplementing, you know, they're not dusting crickets. This is like the number one rule, you know, so that was a problem. I go, let's start gut loading. Let's start gut loading and let's start supplementing, you know. And they had like a bunch of cave geckos, a bunch of Goniosaurus, and some of them were really fucked up, like fucked up. And I assure you, it had nothing to do with UV lighting. And so, I mean, their elbows were all screwed up. Their legs were like, you know, bendable, you know, and I don't mean at the joint. And, you know, and then I go to see what they're doing with, they had a lot of issues with tadpoles and tadpole development. And I go to find out, well, let me see what this and this. And it took a long time to figure it out. It took a long time to figure it out. And then I found out, oh, you're feeding medicated chicken food. Like this is the number one, even back in the day, Philippe was writing in his books 40 years ago. Never feed your crickets medicated chicken food. You know, I don't feed chicken food. I don't have any issue with feeding chicken food. But feeding medicated chicken food is a big problem. And because of what it has in it to break the parasite cycle, the life cycle of parasites and things like coccidia and all that. And, you know, it has a thing that while it blocks the life cycle of the parasite, which makes that parasite become a non-issue because it dies off. It's not able to replicate. It's also blocking the absorption of like different B vitamins and other things. And so like that was that once I switched that, did the supplementation and did this other gut loading within one clutch, all problems were fixed, you know? And so, you know, it's like there's a lot of lessons to be learned in the right way of doing things by studying the history of what gave people success. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned by the failures in history in reptile keeping, you know? And
Yeah,
so
I mean,
often I just see people that have been doing it for years, they get they it's like, well, this thing is what gave you success 30 years ago. struggling now after 30 years. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm looking at the way you're doing things right now, and I'm looking at the things the way you used to do things back when you were writing the book on how to do it, literally writing the book on how to do it. And you built your whole company off of the success that you had 30 years ago. Why are you doing things so differently now than the way you were doing them before? When that's what gave you had success then, you're not having success now. And then they always, it's sometimes it's just simple. Sometimes we get in our own way a lot
Yeah.
too, and sometimes it's just human arrogance and ego and pride. And you may not even be a prideful person or an arrogant person or an egomaniac. It's just your own. People get into this thing where it's like, well, the way I do it is the right way because I did it and I had success and I've had success. But it's like you're not having success now. And I have to do things too. Like I make changes here and there. I'm constantly trying to evolve, and sometimes you have to make changes because there's no other options. There's always been hiccups in supply chains of certain things, and stuff like that. There was cricket problems years ago in California, and then after that there were superworm problems that affected the whole country. And I don't use a lot of superworms, but I certainly use a lot of crickets. Not as much as I
Yeah.
used to, but
So, couple questions. So, you're what other types of bugs are you feeding your Nautinus? I mean, obviously, it's crickets is a big one, but are you trying other things uh, besides that, or mainly just crickets?
I mean, crickets and mealworms. That's it. You know, I don't do this anymore. I was going to tell you about this, but I don't do it. I don't do it anymore, and I don't really know why. I think the reason why I don't do it is because I don't have this massive collection of geckos that eats fruit. Like there was a time when I had like like almost 300 species of gecko in my collection, and I had other stuff too. I think at the time I didn't realize how big my collection was. And then I did realize how big it was. And then I started to count, oh my God, like I have over 100 genera of gecko, and some of these genera, I have like 30 species, 20 species, 18 species, like even at the time, I think I had like 25 to 30 species of just Pachydactylus. And then I think I had like 25 species of Phelsuma, and 20 species of Hemidactylus, and so on, right? And so I would do this thing where I would feed, because I feed yogurt, and what I would do is I had this old blender, and I would throw crickets and mealworms in the yogurt and blend it up, and I would put like bee pollen and some supplements in it, and I would just make this slop. And that's what I fed everybody. And the Nautinus got that too. They're no different. They don't get treated any more special than anybody else, I know they're the celebrities and all that, but like they need to be humbled. So,
Yeah.
uh, like it's funny because like my kid, it's funny because like I don't show a lot of pictures of them. And I don't like to, because then it just invites a lot of inquiries.
Yeah.
But I post stuff here and there, and I've posted stuff in the past. And I remember I posted a picture of one of my kids with like Nautinus all over their. I don't remember if it was like 2 or 3 or 4, but I know like one was on one shoulder, one over here, and I think one over here. Whatever, it's
Yep.
a handful of them crawling on him. And I posted the picture on, I think, Instagram or Facebook or something. And everybody's like, "Oh, that kid doesn't know how lucky he is." And I'm like, "No, he doesn't care. He doesn't know the difference between those and like a green anole. He thinks they're all awesome, And and I'm still like, I have leopard geckos. Well, they're not mine, but I have leopard geckos like in the hallway right around the corner over here, and I have fire belly toads. I actually have a lot of fire belly toads, and I have some really cool fire belly toads. They're not just normal ones. And but even like my kid has a crested gecko, and so they're just geckos, so they don't get treated much differently. All of my animals are held at the same level of regard,
Yeah.
but I would do that. Uh, but that's it, man. I never really. I mean, I guess I would give them dubia. I would give small dubia to Naltinus. I wouldn't have any issue with that. It's just like, to me, I don't think it's a necessary thing.
And you're
I mean, I just what's the benefit?
you're feeding in mealworms. You've actually they eat the mealworms.
No problem. Yeah,
That's very interesting. So
yeah. I mean,
and
almost everybody eats mealworms. They don't. Very few
you know
lizards won't eat mealworms.
yeah.
It's a very
So
natural food. I mean, if you look at a lot of scientific papers, stuff that most people don't read. But if you look at a lot of these things, uh, when you get into the gut contents of what they find, when they start to study what these things are consuming, it says many times tenebrionid beetles and their larvae. Well, I mean, a larva of a tenebrionid beetle is a mealworm. So, like, it's a very natural thing. And a lot of animals eat beetles in nature. I mean, it's a very common food source for lizards and frogs and toads and everything. So, why wouldn't they eat their larvae? You know,
yeah.
I don't do soldier fly larvae, phoenix worms, or whatever they call phoenix worms now, because I think they're gross. They just look too much like a maggot to me, and I think maggots are disgusting.
Yeah.
so,
I totally get that.
so I just don't. Yeah,
Yeah. So when you when one last thing I wanted to discuss tonight was when you're it obviously naturally gets cold or cooler in California. So what is the coldest that you get your animals to, and then for how long are you doing that? Are you letting it the whole natural through winter time just naturally be that temperature and that's just what it is, and then you're spot feeding based
yeah,
on the temperatures outside?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Yeah, we
the
have.
only reason why I would bring something aside from the only reason why I would bring something in at night is just because of predators.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a lot to do with temperature. It doesn't get that cold here. I mean, it gets cold. There's many days where it's in the 50s, and at night it gets down into the low 40s, and maybe even every once in a while the high 30s. That's not the concern for me. The concern for keeping animals outside is
Uh-oh. All right, everybody. We're gonna shut it down because we're having internet problems again. So I hope you have a great week, and we'll talk soon.